Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City, of course, are back in action tomorrow evening when they take on Oxford United at Carrow Road in the evening kickoff. Now, Oxford are a team who haven't won in 7. They obviously are newly promoted and are probably looking behind them more than above them. But Norwich have seen already this season, and probably with some of the results that Gary Rowett has produced, that's nothing to take for granted, especially when you look at results against Derby, Preston, Hull, some of the other games around that Norwich have had, and some of the inconsistency this season. You can't really bank on them at any point, so it should be an interesting game, and you know the drill here on Tactics Board. First of all, I'm going to take you through the 11 that I think Johannes Hoftorp will choose for the game. Then I'm going to look at Oxford, some of the threats that they pose, some of their weaknesses, and how the game might play out tactically. And then we're going to take a look at the left side of defence, which I think has been a debate throughout the season, but it's taken on a new dimension with so many players now involved. So we'll come on to all of that, but we're going to start with the predicted 11. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Marcelino Nunez, Jakob Sorensen and Anis Ben Slimane in the middle of midfield, with Ante Cianat on the right, Borja Sainz on the left, and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. Now, it's important to say that I'm doing this before the press conference this afternoon, so for the very latest team news, head to the main page on this YouTube channel or to pinken.com for updates from that. Of course, a few things that could change and a few injury situations in the balance, so this might be a bit of a rough prediction, but as far as what we know for sure Norwich have got available, I think that's the best team that Torp can choose. Obviously, there's that left side of defence, which I mentioned and we'll discuss in more detail. But I think basically that Jose Cordoba's performances in the last 2 games have been so good that you can't really afford to drop him. He's given Norwich something that they have lacked at times when it's been Doyle and Duffy in the middle of defence, that pace, that athleticism, that agility that maybe has been lacking a little bit and allows them to press a little bit higher up the pitch. So it makes sense for me to keep him in there. And then I think Callum Doyle at left back makes sense because although on an individual level, he does look like a centre back and he looks more comfortable in that central role, he gives you that physicality, that aerial presence and a bit of that organisational leadership as well. I think as a team, Norwich look better when he's at left back. They look a bit better balanced and they can provide those possession-based threats from both sides because we know that teams like to press to allow the centre-backs to have it, for Shane Duffy to have it. But if you've got Kellen Fisher, who's a decent ball player on one side, Callum Doyle and Jose Cordoba on the other side, then you wouldn't necessarily press in one direction if you're the opposition team. It gives them more options to consider and maybe gives Norwich a bit more space to operate with as well. So I think having Callum Doyle out there gives them a bit more balance. Also, there's the fact that Ben Krasene and Lucian Mahovo, of course, would both be sort of injury doubts over, given the last couple of games. Krasene took that pretty tough tackle from Dennis. Mahovo obviously missed the Blackburn game as well through a minor knee injury. So there is that element too. And I think on the balance of probabilities, it feels likely that Torp will go for Cordoba and Doyle on that left side of defence. Then aside from that, of course, there's the Kenny McLean fitness issue as well in midfield. But without knowing for sure what that's going to be, it's hard to predict. And I think the midfield there has done a decent enough job in the last few games. But the only other position I've gone for a change is right wing. And although we're awaiting confirmation, that Lewis Dobbin calf injury did look pretty serious when he just pulled up on a sprint in the first half of that Blackburn game. Obviously, you hope it's not too serious because he had started to really come into his own and looked like a very good signing on loan for Norwich. So you hope that's not too serious, but for this game, it feels unlikely that he'll be available. So it's a good thing that Ante Cianat's got his goal against Blackburn. Now, you do feel sorry for him that he wasn't quite able to enjoy that moment. It felt like all the attention would be on him. Everyone would be focused on that fantastic goal that really should have won Norwich the game before they managed to see it out and made the mistakes that they shouldn't have to allow Blackburn back into the game, because it was a fantastic finish. I think it showed what Seaman can do. And when you break down his numbers this season, 6 goals, 4 assists for somebody who's had to be a backup striker, who's played out of position on the right for most of the season, and is still only 21, adapting to life in English football. A young 21 as well, was 20 when he arrived at Norwich, so will be 21 for a good chunk of next season. I think he's done okay. That's more goal contributions than Ashley Barnes contributed for Norwich last season. It's more than Borja Sainz got in his first season at the club. So really the numbers aren't too bad. I think there is still more to come from him, and consistency has particularly been an issue. I think he can impose himself on games more, maybe take more risks on the ball and be more involved. But I think that's a part of the game that maybe we don't see, and part of the adaptation that we don't talk about too much is the fact that, much like anyone in any workplace really, when you go in, you have to be a really, really confident person, probably an experienced person as well, to be able to go into that environment and be loud and be imposing and almost demand the attention in that role, which I think is what Seaman needs to do a little bit. But you'd say that that will come with time as he gets more used to the people in the dressing room, as he becomes more of an important figure in that social sense. Then you'd suggest that he'll be able to do that a little bit more on the football pitch, and then we'll begin to see a bit more from Seaman. But I think he warrants inclusion for this one, especially with the fact that Jurasek has missed the last 2 games, of course, and Dobbin looks like he may well be injured. But whatever happens, it will be very interesting when that team news drops tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So make sure you're on pinkun.com when that happens and you won't miss a thing. Now on to Oxford, and although there has been a little bit of refinery to what Des Buckingham was doing and what Oxford used to really dominate Norwich in that first game, Norwich weren't able to create much defensively. They looked pretty ragged, and the press really exposed them at the back with that duo of Grant Hanley and Shane Duffy, as it was at that time. Gary Rowett has obviously come in and changed things slightly, but I think it is still quite a similar sort of setup to what it was then. They still look to press high when they can. They're still very compact defensively, and it's the sort of test that maybe Norwich have struggled with previously this season, not just in terms of a low block, but in terms of the fact that they can be a bit more aggressive. They've obviously got the pace of Przemysław Poeta, somebody who Norwich fans know well and seems to be getting on quite well at the Kassam, especially under Rowett, who's gone a bit more back to basics in terms of just knocking the ball in front of him and allowing him to run. So they do provide that direct threat, just like Preston did when they beat Norwich 1-0. They'll try to press and get in the faces of the opposition, but this is where you feel that left side of defence will really come into its own against Norwich. Of course, when they played at the Kassam in the first game of the season, they had Shane Duffy on the left side of defence, and we've seen the problems that he has even on his most natural position, trying to play the ball out from the back. This was even more difficult on the left side, and that was a problem for Norwich, trying to progress the ball. Obviously, they had Grant Hanley, who maybe isn't as progressive as some of the younger defenders that Norwich now have either, but they're likely to have Jose Cordoba in there. At least one of him and Callum Doyle will be in there, maybe both. And when you've got both of those options, obviously Doyle did make his debut for Norwich against Oxford in that first game of the season, but now he's bedded in, they can get the ball to him more easily, and with those progressive passes and that comfort on the ball, the Oxford press shouldn't be quite as successful as it was in that first day of the season. Certainly not if Norwich are able to play to their capabilities, if they're proactive, if they move the ball quickly, then you'd say there's more of an opportunity for them there than there was early on in the season. And as far as breaking down that low block, I thought there were good signs at the start of the second half against Blackburn. We haven't really seen them pen a team in like that much before this season, and I think it's something they want to do. Of course, having that higher line of defence that Cordoba allows means that they can press a little bit higher, they can pen teams in, they can dominate in possession. And there was one occasion I noticed where Blackburn actually tried to clear the ball 5 times and was stopped in their final third. Norwich won a press 5 times in a row in the final third, and that is really what they need to do if they want to pen teams in a little bit more. If they want to do that to a better extent and they want to create chances from that, then there needs to be more of the same. And I think they are in a better position to do that now against an Oxford defence that is actually decent ball playing wise, but maybe not the best in the league. So you'd say that if Norwich can be on their game and they can do that a little bit better, then they could be in with a real chance of penning that Oxford team in and having much more time actually in important areas to try to create those chances. So I think that's a positive for them going into this one. But as I said, many threats for them to look out for from the away side. Now, you can probably tell from the number of times I've already mentioned Jose Cordoba, Callum Doyle, the left side of that defence, how important I think it's going to be for Norwich in this game and going forward. They just look so much better in and out of possession when they have Cordoba in there, because they can press so much higher, knowing that if the ball gets knocked in behind, they don't have to win that first header or make sure that they win the physical duel, because there is that insurance policy of the pace that Cordoba has. And I think we've already seen 4 or 5 times in each game that he's played since Callum Doyle has been suspended that he can just muscle defenders out of the way. He can he can accelerate for a couple of seconds, put the brakes on, and then just play the ball back to Gunn, which you don't really see happening very often with Shane Duffy or Callum Doyle, because they just don't have that agility, that quickness, that pace to get back and win those situations. So I think Cordoba gives them almost an insurance policy to be able to press higher up the pitch. That's really important for them, as I was saying, if they want to pen an opposition in and have more time in the final third to try to create chances and dominate games in that way. But also in sort of the build-up phase, I think it gives them a lot, because he maybe isn't as incisive as Doyle, but he can move the ball a lot quicker than some of his sort of centre-back colleagues. While Doyle usually looks for that incisive pass into midfield or into Josh Sargent early, Cordoba quite often gets the ball and very quickly gets it out to the left-back, which is great news if you've got someone like Callum Doyle out there. Of course, Lucian Mahovo and Ben Krezene are both fairly good on the ball, but I think it's fair to say that Doyle is the best player they have in that squad at passing the ball out from defence. So if Cordoba can get it there quickly, if they can get it to Doyle before the press is able to shift over and stop his passing capabilities, you've then got your best ball player on the ball for 3-4 seconds, looking up, looking at the options. And if he's got the runs ahead of him, you'd back him to, with that time and space, find the best available option. So I think those two on that left side does work really, really well. Cordoba's certainly opened a debate with 2 very, very good performances. And it just feels like with some of the fitness issues as well, with how Oxford play, that might be how Torp is best served going forward. But of course, we'll see about that and loads of other interesting stuff around the game. Of course, my article on the Cordoba situation on the left side of defence is available to read exclusively for Pinken subscribers now. So go to pinken.com/subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll have access to that. Columns from Chris Sutton, Ewan Roberts, loads of other good stuff going into the game. So I would highly recommend it. And of course, we'll have every kick covered across those channels. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. And hopefully next time we talk, it will be with a very positive tint after a win against Oxford. See you later.